Good evening, everyone, SEC football fans. Welcome to the show that you need to hit each and every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central. SEC Breakdown, and the gang's all here tonight, so this should be a great show. Left to right, Chad Neipling, David Waters, Mike Loveall from Last Word on Sports. I'm Mark Rogers, and we talk SEC football each and every Wednesday night. Just a few precious weeks, counting down to the season, about 10 to go. And we are amped and ready to go. So, Athlon Sports, go to the link, find it. It's your AP or it's your Athlon's All-America team going into 2016. And I'll hit the highlights, guys, and then we can jump right in on it, Chad. The quarterback position, no SEC players, no big surprise. First to four teams, Deshaun Watson, Clemson, Baker Mayfield, Oklahoma, J.T. Barrett, Ohio State, Greg Ward, Houston. The running back position, very nicely represented by Leonard Fournette on the first team along with Dalvin Cook. We've got Jalen Hurd showing up. And also at the athlete position, per se, you've got Nick Chubb on the fourth team, Christian McCaffrey, the second Heisman ballot nominee at number one. So, Chad, what stands out to you on this one?
Man, it really, when I'm looking at it, one, I like the fact that Jalen Hurd is getting some attention here, albeit it's on the fourth team. I'd kind of like to see, I think he could be ranked better when I'm looking at this group of running backs. And why do we even have an AP position? Can we not just call it, third running back, because that's really what it is here at this point? I mean, I think Christian McCaffrey, the number one spot is completely solid, in my opinion. I think this guy, honestly, is one of the more underrated players in the country. We saw that last year. Leonard Fournette at the number one spot in the running back, not really shocked there. A guy that has put up a slew of touchdowns this last season. Will probably do so again this season if LSU has any semblance of a passing attack. And then you turn around and you look at Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb at the fourth spot is actually really kind of interesting to me because, Stephen Lasson, who wrote the piece, talks about that this is projections in 2016 that he's talking about, more or less about how he thinks they're going to do. And maybe Nick Chubb doesn't do as well as he thinks he does under this first year with Kirby Smart, so maybe I'm reading into that a little much, but still I think that's kind of interesting considering the season that he had up until that injury that he suffered in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I think this is maybe that's speaking to that, as far as how that role is going to turn for him with Sonny Michel and him sharing the carries there. But and of course, no quarterback out of the SEC. This year you've got two guys, Dobbs and Kelly, pretty much leading the way. And, for me, I'm actually kind of surprised that Kelly didn't get some type of naming in here because you got to figure this year he's probably going to shatter some of Ole Miss's passing records. Yeah, I think if I'm looking at this and having to look at these guys, I mean, what do you base your criteria on? Statistics? Are you looking at certain big game performances and things of that nature? And if you are, then maybe that's where you start to separate. Because I think once you start looking at the national scope, and you're looking at all these players from all these Power 5 teams, you got to figure there's got to be some type of structure because you're looking and nitpicking at these guys. So for me, I'd probably have to look at stats and key games, championship games, big-time conference games, rival games, and start looking at how they performed to tell me about how these guys did overall during the season.
David, your thoughts about what we've covered here at quarterback and running back?
I agree with Chad. I thought Chad Kelly would probably maybe get that 14, but I don't have a problem with Greg Ward being there. Or, and maybe third team with J.T. Barrett as well. But, seeing what, he's potential under Urban Meyer, and that's what the author here is based on potential. I just think, I have no problem with that. Barrett, if Ohio State and Meyer can get those ducks in a row there and kind of get over the little quarterback hump they had last year, I see no reason why J.T. Barrett is not probably one of the four best quarterbacks in the nation. Really surprised with Nick Chubb. If this is based on projection, maybe he sees Chubb maybe misses some time from the injury, or maybe he just sees Nick Chubb not really coming back from the injury full go. It was a nasty injury, we all know. It may take some time to get over it. But if you're asking me right now, Nick Chubb's probably a top 3, 4, 5 running back to me. So I guess this kind of reflects that in a way, but I would have Nick Chubb a good bit higher. I think he's better than Wayne Gallman. Artavis Scott from Clemson, better than those guys if you want to move him up on the all-purpose list there. So, Nick Chubb, that's probably the biggest surprise for me. I would have Nick Chubb a little higher. Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, the first two. I'm one of the few rare people I think I like Dalvin Cook a little more than Leonard Fournette. I do get to see him a little bit more here in Florida, and I followed his recruiting and stuff. But I just think overall he's a little bit more electric playmaker than Leonard Fournette. All-around game is probably just a tad bit better. Leonard Fournette's probably a hair bit better running back, but overall I like Dalvin Cook just a little bit better.
Mike, we're going to point to you to give a comment on Jalen Hurd, but what catches your eye across the board at running back and quarterback?
Well, I don't think the quarterback position is very surprising. If you look at the SEC, it's definitely a conference where the defense dominates. And if you look at the breakdown of the Athlon All-American team, the SEC has more guys on the defense on every team than they have on the offense. First team, second team, third team, fourth team. Now, I have no issue with any of those four quarterbacks being ahead of Chad Kelly or especially Josh Dobbs. I think Chad Kelly will have to earn the All-American position this year based on his body of work. If you look at the top three, Watson, Mayfield, and Barrett, they all took their teams to either the playoffs or just short of the playoffs. Ole Miss really wasn't in contention there at the end of the season. And Greg Ward, I think, is a legitimate fourth-team quarterback there. As far as running back, I will say to Chad's point, I'm kind of okay with the all-purpose position. I think what the all-purpose position reflects is the diversity of offenses in college football today. You got slot receivers. I don't know a single team except for Georgia Tech, Navy, and Army that has three running backs on the field at one time. So I think the all-purpose position on an All-American team, it not only is justified, but I think it's a good thing because it reflects the diversity of the offenses in college ball, and it allows the voting organization, whether it's Athlon or AP or another organization, to really reward those guys who deserve it but might not fit in based on the system that they play in. As far as Jalen Hurd, I think Jalen Hurd is deserving of a fourth-team offense. Could you put him in the third team? I think you can make an argument. Here's the thing that I think hurts Jalen Hurd. Of the 8, 9, 10, if you include McCaffrey and Chubb and Scott. So of the 11 guys there in the running back, the 11 running backs there, Jalen Hurd splits his time splits his carries more than any of those other 10 guys. I don't have the stats with me, but I'd be willing to lay down quite a bit of money that says he has the lowest percentage of his team's carries of all 11 of those guys. That's probably why he's fourth team and no higher.
Well, I'm going to back that up. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I just scanned it myself, and the rest of those guys get the bulk of their team's carries, no question. Scott and Nelson are receivers, but the other guys that you mentioned, the other 10, are the main guy, more so than Chubb versus what Sony Michel gets at Georgia. I will speak to the quarterback situation in regards to J.T. Barrett was not one of the four best quarterbacks in the country last year in terms of production because he didn't even win the job, and then he gained the job at about game 10 or 11, and he may have been one of the best quarterbacks in the country by the end of the season based on what he did against Michigan and Notre Dame. 2 years ago, he set a Big Ten touchdown record. He was an exceptional quarterback. Obviously, the projection is, hey, he's got the gig from start to finish. He's going to produce. Chad Kelly, 4,000-yard season. I've seen him on a lot of top 3 lists, third-team All-America type status, so he's certainly in that argument, and we would have to have the writers here to have them determine for us who that fifth guy, sixth guy were and how close they were to getting into the discussion there. The only issue with playing devil's advocate on the AP position there, Mike, is you get flagged for having a 12th man on the field. So you can't hit the field with this All-American team on offense because they're going to flag you. But, man, that guy, Calvin Ridley, I've already started to talk, guys, about Calvin Ridley possibly being a dark horse for the Heisman Trophy this year. He's not playing in some kind of West Coast offense or a Mountain West type offense at a like we see at San Diego State or somewhere where they're going to throw the ball all over the field to have just ridiculous statistics. But I think he could have Amari Cooper-type stats and then obviously have the huge, ridiculous catches, meaningful catches in huge games. I think Calvin Ridley could just, I wouldn't want to call it a breakout year, maybe from star player to superstardom. Your thoughts, Mike, we'll start with you on the wide receiver position, and beyond that, where we see Ridley as a first-team All-American player at wide receiver out of Alabama. Let's see, we got Christian Kirk, who had a huge freshman campaign out of Texas A&M on the second team. At tight end, O.J. Howard. Hey, if he does what he did in the national championship game, which of course he's not going to week, but hey, he might be the best tight end in the country, regardless of what the stats say.
Mark, I completely agree with your assessment of Calvin Ridley. He's not going to put up the numbers that some of those guys are going to put up, particularly Kirk or probably Schuster, but he's going to have the most important catches of anybody out there. If Alabama's to get back, they're going to have to incorporate their receiving game. But I'm actually more impressed with O.J. Howard. He come into last season with a lot of expectations. He's fourth team, and I'm going to tell you, I think a lot of Jordan Leggett. I think he's really good at Clemson. But of the four guys there, the best player to me, athleticism, importance to his team, I think O.J. Howard's probably one of the best players in all of college football. I was surprised to see him fourth team, and I think O.J. Howard will mean more to Alabama's success in 2016 than Calvin Ridley will.
All right, guys, we got a little party crasher here, so I guess we'll let him speak. Peter Burns joining us from the SEC Network. Peter, it's good to see you, man.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah,
no, that's good. I think
we're
doing better now. We can hear you.
I want to maybe go see The Nice Guys, the movie, with and I saw it and I couldn't believe it. It was arguably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Actually, now she's looking at me. Okay, now she's saying I made her see it. So okay, I won't tell the truth anymore. So
you should know better than that to make those kind of comments while she's still within earshot.
Smartest thing I've done all day long. So hopefully talking a little SEC will be a little bit better.
Yeah, Peter, what have you been up to? We know that, here we only talk football, but we know that they actually do play other sports in the SEC.
Yeah, in fact, yesterday, we got to the point where we were done with the rest of college baseball. Florida got eliminated. I know, tear down my eye as well, too. As I see Florida Gators over there. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of crazy. The overall #1 seed, and it was just nuts that we had 7 out of the top 10 teams in the country in SEC baseball, and sure enough, they weren't able to actually even win one game in Omaha. So now the SEC network kind of just chills out and gets ready for football season.
Yeah, so let's talk a little football, and then I'll turn these other guys loose, and they can go at it as well. In regards to football season, what is the coverage going to look like at this point? I know you haven't exactly dug in on the big production meetings at this point probably, but what's football coverage looking like in terms of personnel and who's going to be where at the SEC network?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be kind of changing things up. It used to be me, Dari Noak, and Maria Taylor that were going to be in studio. Now Laura Rutledge is going to be joining us in studio. Which is going to be cool because Maria Taylor, as you know, will be taking over for Joe Tessitore on SEC Nation. That's going to be a really cool fit. I think SEC Nation is going to have a little bit of a different feel to it this upcoming season. I think the first couple of years it's really looked like College Game Day, and I think it's going to be a little bit faster paced now, not so regimented, kind of like a game day is. I think it'll just be a lot more kind of free-flowing. So I think we're excited about that. It's going to be great to have Laura in studio with us because, I mean, if you know Laura Rutledge, she's done a fantastic job covering SEC football, baseball. She's great. I mean, but just talking sports, she could be an analyst for us. I mean, she's incredible with the depth of knowledge that she has. So, between her, Kaylee Hartung, and Maria Taylor, we've got, I think 3 of the best in the biz that are just pretty fantastic at what they do. So we're excited about it. I mean, the next thing we have live is going to be down in Birmingham or outside of Hoover for SEC Media Days. So I'm thinking it'll be LSU and Tennessee who they pick, but I've been proven wrong before. So.
Peter, y'all jump in. I guess every Saturday, you sit there and sit with the analysts and stuff. What is it like, to sit with those guys for, I'm guessing, close to 12, 13, 14 hours a day? What's the insight that, they've brought in where, it's kind of just maybe blown you away with the passion of the SEC players, fans that you get from these analysts that you get to spend Saturdays with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Twofold, I'll answer it. One, for me, it's like the dream job because I'm just a fan that ended up getting the chance to be able to do this for a living. So for me to sit there and watch baseball with Ben McDonald or to watch football with Greg McElroy, and it's just kind of something like I kind of won a lotto every single week. I think it's pretty cool. I think the one thing I've noticed for our analysts as well too is that traditionally when a lot of former athletes want to get into our industry, what happens, they think that they could just show up and, hey, they could just talk sports. And they don't understand how much work goes into it on the analyst. Like, I've got the easy job. All I have to do is basically, ask the question. No offense, Mark, because I know that's what you're doing as well today, too. But
I've got these guys fooled, Peter. Stop it right now. No more of that.
That's what we do. We get us in and out. And, whenever I start talking about, hey, let's go ahead and talk why Alabama's going to maybe struggle on the offensive line this year. Well, McElroy has looked at film. He's talked to coaches, and they know that information tenfold because they've played it, but they've also done so much homework. I think that was the biggest eye-opening thing for me is how much homework our analysts do. And it's not just to kind of fake it. It's just they take a passion. They're so competitive that they all try to one-up each other on who's the best analyst. And I think hopefully the viewer, ends up winning in that case.
Hey, Peter, it's Chad. Hoping to see you down at Media Days this year. I know you'll probably be really, really busy, and hopefully that jacket is smaller for me because if I see it. But I just wanted to kind of get you.
$700, we'll make it happen.
Hey, brother, I will bring you cash. We'll make that happen. All right. So I just wanted to kind of get your take. We've been kind of talking. There's been a lot of preseason All-American talk, a lot of guys that, we may feel are underrated, overrated. Who's kind of sticking out to you? Like what team that you've seen so far, maybe in the spring, had a chance to talk about, is possibly kind of sticking out in your mind that may possibly make a run this year that maybe some of these other outlets aren't talking about so much?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because, the ones that I've been asked that question several times, and I keep wondering who is that team that can take that next step. I mean, we saw Mississippi State take it a couple years ago because there was a Dak Prescott, right? You wonder if Ole Miss is going to be that way because Chad Kelly comes back at the quarterback position. And, I mean, outside of Josh Dobbs, really, he's the only guy that's really going to should light the world on fire. But you lose Kim Dichie, you lose Tunsil, you lose Treadwell, you lose so many good players. I don't know if Ole Miss can do it. And I think it's so hard in the West to come out of nowhere like an Arkansas or something like that because Alabama's going to be good again. I think Auburn will be a little bit better. Ole Miss is still going to be solid. I think the class is still going to be LSU. And I know we've talked about it a million times already, or you guys probably have, and everyone has done it. But, I mean, Tennessee continues. There's got to be so much pressure on Butch Jones this season because you can't look at their roster up and down right now and say that they don't have as much talent as maybe anybody outside of LSU and Alabama. The question is, and what we're all waiting for is the hype going to finally, or the substance going to finally live up to the hype that has been rocking up in Rocky Top here for the last, 2 years or so.
Peter, Mike Loveall here. I got a question for you. But before I ask you the question, I want to tell you I appreciate your work with the JRG Foundation. That's great stuff. I want to take a look at the business of college sports. The SEC network is expected to generate $530+ million, about 35 per team plus million. The Big Ten last week secured a $2.6 billion agreement over 6 years. What do you think? How do you think this is going to affect the competitive balance of college football over the next decade? And then kind of an additional question, how is it going to affect the non-revenue generating sports as well?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think we're getting to the point where ESPN wants to have as many of these college networks as possible, as you've seen the success right now with the SEC network and Big Ten media rights that just came out. I think you're eventually going to get to the point to answer both of those questions, whereas I almost feel like there's going to be a fourth division of college football, where it's not D1, D2, D3. I feel like you're going to almost get to a Division 4, which is just going to be the Power 5 conferences. And I know that it sounds weird, but just the money has become so outlandish and outrageous. I think that's the reason why people have talked about possibly having a commissioner of college football. that these power brokers, the SEC, the Big Ten, the Pac-12, where they get their network figured out, and even the Big 12, if they end up putting out a network, and so is the ACC, I think eventually that they're going to say, why do we keep the NCAA around? At this point, do we really need to have it at least for football? It's kind of like the old mafia bosses back in the day saying, hey, you know what? We don't need the government or the police to make the rules. We're going to sit here at the big table. If the 5 families come together, and we're going to decide what rules that we play by. And I think you've seen a little bit of that in NCAA, with the autonomy rules and whatnot. But I think with the amount of money now, I think finally the conferences are going to say we don't need the NCAA. On the side of it, they do need the NCAA for the non-revenue sports, right? So how can you balance both of them? I mean, there's no doubt that every single coach of non-revenue sports comes to us at the SEC Network and thanks us profusely because we're putting gymnastics on air. We're airing track and field. We're showcasing swimming and diving or other sports. So at the end of the day, everyone to a certain extent makes not necessarily money, but has a lot more success because now there's a lot more funding to go around to say, hey, the golf team now is a little bit better, or they can do all this other training facilities. My sister played golf real quick for LSU, and she had the same exact rights as Zach Mettenberger, who was a quarterback at LSU. If she needed a tutor, she could get it at any time. She had the best food, the best training facilities. So I think the non-revenue sports really kind of jump up, now that all these networks are starting to funnel out. Sorry, that was a 15-minute answer to the
Is she the best golfer in your family?
Yeah, unfortunately. She has the only hole-in-one. She's 3-time state Louisiana champ, and I'm still always trying to catch her. So it's and she gets to play from the white tees. I mean, she kills me every time we play.
Peter, that leads me to my next question, and you're around it a lot up there. I'm tired of the cupcake games in the SEC, and especially in November. I'm sure you've heard it all summer. We've talked about it. The 9-game conference schedule. I mean, ACC is talking about it now, maybe to try and team up with ESPN to get a deal going for them. Do you think it's a good idea for the SEC, as tough as the conference is? And I'm sure it helps the SEC network because it gives them the one more game that they can showcase that's not a cupcake.
Yeah, I mean, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't on both ways, right? Because honestly, whenever Saban a couple years ago was saying, "Hey, man, we want to have more conference games," I'm like, why? I mean, like at this point, I look at the Big Ten that has some of the easiest schedules. Even the ACC, when Florida State made its run and they didn't have a lot of competition, I'm thinking, why on earth do you want to have harder games, right? But at the same point, I'm selfish because I like when we have the conference games. I like when we have good games. But I think it's unrealistic, and I'm biased because I'm an SEC guy. You're probably biased as you see all the Florida Gators gear stuff in there, is that I think it's unfair for SEC schools to beat up on each other every single week and then not have an easier game on the schedule, McNeese State or App State or somebody like that. So I don't know. I am torn with it. I know it's in basketball, the scheduling has changed a lot because the SEC has really struggled regarding getting teams in the tournament and the quality of play. But for football, I don't know. Part of me almost wants less conference games, so that way you could have more Minnesotas and you can have more okay squads that are going to probably be 5-5 or 5-6. And you get more respect than when everybody makes fun of the SEC when you play Northeast Louisiana or whatever.
Peter, I probably didn't set the table for you well. A lot of the discussions we get into, it's 3-on-1. So I really didn't need it to be 4-on-1 when you made that disparaging comment about the Big Ten, but I'll take it anyway.
Hey, listen, we had to go ahead and do it. Listen, in the Big Ten, I mean, now you're looking. At least I'm glad that what Harbaugh is doing, right? I mean, Harbaugh, I don't think he's great. I'll take this back. I said a long time ago, I didn't think he was great for college football, but I thought he was great for the media of college football. But if he helps bring the Big Ten out, competition is great. So I'm all for it.
Hey, Peter, we could talk all night with you talking SEC football. We appreciate you stopping by. I'm going to make one more comment, and you can tack on to it as well in regards to the reason I think that the SEC network works beyond the obvious that football's king in the SEC and SEC football is the best in the country, is that I have conversations a little bit more than the other three in regards to other conference shows that I do and guys that I talk to. And the ACC struggling to put together a network. They don't know if it'll be viable. The Pac-12 has struggled to a certain extent in getting subscriptions because it's not as popular on the West Coast. And if you look at just the programming time, everybody focuses on football, but that's only 14, 15 weeks a year for a Saturday and maybe a Thursday night. It's where do you fill up the rest of the programming schedule, and are people going to watch that? And I think that's where the passion and the interest and the knowledge of the typical SEC fan trumps the other leagues, is that they're engaged in the rest of that programming, the non-revenue sports, and also just the historical shows, the documentaries, and those do extremely well on that network, and it shows the passion of the fan base.
No, and we appreciate that. I mean, I think the best work that we do, Mark, is not necessarily college football. I feel like if you're a college football fan, you can get that in many different ways, right? I mean, even the major networks and CBS provides it, Fox Sports 1 provides it, all the other regional networks provide it. I feel like the most important work that we do may be for women's sports and baseball and softball and gymnastics. I mean, that's crazy because, in the sports world, you're like, well, no one's really watching it. If you look at the numbers that people are watching Friday Night Heights, which is our gymnastics live, we've never had that before, and it was off the roof. When you start looking at the digital numbers and the numbers of SEC baseball fans tuning in each and every week, it's amazing because this crowd has never been serviced that way. This crowd has never had a chance to truly see all 50-some-odd games of Florida Gators baseball, which has been unbelievable, and get to see all these LSU games. So as much as I'm proud of our college football, I think you nailed it. I think it's what we do for the other sports that I'm probably most proud of over there at the network.
Yeah, the anniversary is coming up in mid-August, and as I understand it, that's when ratings are going to be available, and it's going to be extremely interesting and I believe eye-opening how popular the network is.
And I actually have been opposed to ratings, and I'm being dead serious about it because the way our business model is actually set up, we're making X amount of dollars right now. No matter how many people, 0 or 100 million people will tune in to one of our shows. Like, it doesn't matter. That is always set. And I almost have, I've talked about it before where if we never rated on Nielsen, I'd almost be okay with that. We have good core clients on a business aspect, but I think probably our advertising dollars are a small fraction of what our total revenue is. So I've gone back and forth with it. I think we will see good numbers, but if we never got a rating, I think that we'd still have clients that would buy it because of the passion of the fans, and I think we'd still have success because people will look to go to a DirecTV or a Comcast or whatever provider is going to provide the SEC network, and I think it's rare to have that kind of connection with any of my channels. I mean, do you guys? I mean, if there was one channel outside of ESPN right now that you had to have, what is it? HBO? Is that the only one that is a must anymore? I mean, what is a must anymore in cable?
Game of Thrones, but yeah, HBO.
Right, but I mean, I think you're right. I mean, outside of that, I mean, I've got 500 channels anymore, and none of them I really have to have. But if I was building it tomorrow, I'd have to have ESPN. I'd have to have ESPN2, probably NFL Network because it gives me games, the SEC Network, and HBO. And I think outside of that, outside of ABC, NBC, whatever, I don't know if there's other ones that I need to ever have. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that in society.
Hey, Peter, thanks so much for joining us, man. This was a great discussion. You're welcome back anytime, man.
Yeah, sorry for droning on and being late for it. So next time, let me know, and I'll make sure I'll be on time. So.
Well, our producing skills here aren't quite up to snuff in regards to what you're used to, so we're not timed down to the second.
Well, I mean, that's just the Big Ten in you, Mark. I mean, that's what I figured. You guys are having on. So. Hey, guys, I hope
attention to detail, yeah.
I hope to see you guys over at SEC Media Days. And, Mark, I appreciate the invite, okay?
Definitely.
Peter, thanks, man.
That's awesome. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Good stuff. Peter Burns, and just an exceptional guy that I connected with on Twitter. I think I was going back and forth with one of you guys, I think, and Peter all of a sudden follows me, and then I followed him back, and we traded some barbs, and we went from there, and I asked him to do a segment with me, and he jumped right on it, and he was ready to go for this as well, so good stuff. Chad, your thoughts about, let's see, wide receiver. We got Ridley up there. We talked about Christian Kirk on the second team, tight end O.J. Howard for Alabama on the fourth team right now.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting Christian Kirk is in this list here. Shows a lot of respect towards him. It also shows that Steven thinks that obviously they're going to be able to get him the ball quite a bit to be in this group of wide receivers. Calvin Ridley, a guy that we were very familiar with. I think Stewart and some of the other guys are going to come up and show up this year. Again, you got to keep in mind there is an O.J. Howard there. We've been patiently waiting the last couple of years to see how they were going to work him into this offense, and so I'm curious to see how that happens when you've got a guy like Calvin Ridley who's only going to get better. That Amari Cooper type of wide receiver, Julio Jones type of guy, the guys that are just very elite, and that's what you have. And it's really interesting to me that Christian Kirk is in that conversation because he's been a guy that's been a special teams guy. His freshman year, he's very electric as far as his speed and explosiveness. But I'm curious to see how he carries that out across the football season as he plays a major role as a wide receiver. So it could be saying a lot here for Texas A&M, and maybe he's seeing a little something that we don't.
Let me open this up a little bit more and go through the offensive line, then I'll let David speak to the offensive line and the wide receivers as well as Mike. Offensive line, obviously, a distinguishing quality of SEC power teams in recent years at LSU and Alabama in particular. Don't see a whole lot here from the offensive line outside of Cam Robinson from Alabama, of course. A lot from the other Power 5 as we sprinkle through here. And, of course, Ethan Posick from LSU on the second team, and boy, that's pretty much it, David. It's a bit surprising to see the scarcity of offensive line right here on the Athlon's first four teams here.
Right. Dan Skipper from Arkansas in the chat can speak a lot more to him, but to me, it's not too surprising to see an Arkansas offensive lineman with Bielema's recruiting regimen there. Cam Robinson, I guess, interesting just because he's been in the news lately with the off-the-field issues. I doubt that affects how he plays but does he miss some games because of this? Probably too early to say for right now. I don't know if Saban's really come out and said too much of what's going to happen there. If he misses some games, does that hurt his projection to be an All-American? I really doubt it. But he may, first game of the season, USC, he may have to miss that game. Go back to wide receiver. I didn't hit on that. The quick thing I'll just say about Calvin Ridley is, it's all about, also who plays quarterback for Alabama. Cooper Bateman and Blake Barnett, who gets the job there. And, Lane Kiffin has found a way, no matter who the quarterback is, to get the main playmaker the ball. We've seen it in the last 2 years, Blake Sims and Jake Coker last year. So it probably doesn't matter who the quarterback is, but if one of those guys aren't pressing the right buttons with Kiffin, does Ridley's numbers drop a little bit? I'd be interested to see that.
No, Mark, I just echo your comments about the concern on offensive line. Only 3 out of 20 of the offensive line All-Americans coming from the SEC. The SEC has always been a line of scrimmage conference. That is a little concerning for the conference as a whole. But what I will tell you is I think the offensive line is the hardest position to evaluate for a preseason All-American team. Look at the guys on that list, and they are the senior or they are the most senior upperclassmen on the teams that have the best running games. If you look at the running backs in the All-American list, and you look at the offensive linemen, Clemson, Alabama, Florida State, and Arkansas and LSU are great rushing teams. I think the offensive line is the hardest position to evaluate for a preseason, which is why I'm not too worried about the SEC only having 3 of 20. I think at the end of the season, the SEC will have 5 or 6 of those 20 positions on the All-American list.
So you talk offensive line play in the SEC. We can say the same in recent years. Pretty much any decade. Defensive line play in the SEC and how dominant it's been. Jonathan Allen, the pass rushing specialist at Alabama, jumps in on the first team. Mizzou shows up. Charles Harris continues the excellent line play at Mizzou in recent years. Tennessee with Derek Barnett has had huge numbers in terms of sacks and tackles for loss in recent years. Arden Key for LSU, of course, they're always strong up front. And we're talking first and second team with these guys. Myles Garrett, freakish first 2 years at Texas A&M. Anybody else show up here? Florida with Jared Davis on the fourth team as well. So, David, take it away on that defensive front.
Well, the first thing is, Jared Davis is a linebacker. They even put it in parentheses, and they list him in the defensive line category. It seems like they really wanted to fit Jared Davis in there somewhere, but for some reason he's not in the linebacker grouping, even though there's 3 positions on the All-American team there. Made him a defensive lineman, so I'll back him up. He is a linebacker. He's an outside linebacker. Maybe they're he doesn't really rush on the outside edge all that much either. So it's kind of surprising why they have him as a defensive lineman category. I don't know. But yeah, Mark, you mentioned. Derek Barnett, Myles Garrett, and Jonathan Allen. Yeah, give me those 3 right there, and I'll go to fight with anybody. And it's those guys, like you said, Barnett, Garrett. Tackles for losses, sacks, guys in the just disrupting forces that we're used to seeing. Carried over from Dante Fowler's and Jarvis Joneses of the world, and it just keeps going for the SEC. And it's no surprise that number is as deep as it is right there.
There's a dynamic that I think plays into this that's different than other sports. One is that because of the few games that are played, some guys, if they have a reputation coming into a program, maybe have a couple big games, maybe they even miss time or they really haven't been that outstanding yet, but there's anticipation and they find their way onto a team rather in the other sports where there's more games played and more of a track record that is usually asked of them before that they can appear on something like this. But because of the attrition of the sport in terms of injuries and because guys move on, obviously, there are some spots open even though it's a national team and you would think that there would be plenty of guys to choose from. I think some of these teams are sprinkled with guys that aren't really that proven, but they're at exceptional programs, a lot's expected, and maybe they had a couple games last season that showed that they're capable of something big. Chad, we're talking defense here, if anything stands out to you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the fact that Charles Harris out of Missouri, second team, kind of speaks to the fact that we know that Odom is going to be the guy that's going to come in as the head coach, kind of carry that blueprint from Missouri, and it's going to be defensive-oriented. I really like the fact that we are seeing that. So it does. I would assume it gives some Missouri fans a little bit of hope that maybe they can squeeze out a couple games this season that maybe they weren't expected to. Another guy that I'm loving on this list is Jonathan Allen from Alabama. Just a guy you want to talk about, Barnett and Garrett as being disruptive forces, David. I think Jonathan Allen's one of those guys, too, that just comes in and he's just a monster. Another guy to watch out for, though, we're speaking about Alabama. He's not on this list. He's going to be a first-year guy, Tim Williams. This guy looks like an absolute monster, fellas, and he fits that mold of defensive end that Alabama's had in the past where he's just a big, explosive guy. But I do think that what we're seeing here is the respect for the SEC on the defensive side of the ball. You look at this, Arden Key at LSU, you turn around, and yes, I'm still kind of wondering how Jared Davis got in here, but regardless of the fact, he's there. But you see that there's a lot of respect here for that defensive side of the ball, and Mike had alluded to that before we started talking to Peter, that there's a lot more defensive guys from the SEC, and it's still prevalent that the SEC is going to hang its hat on its hard-crushing defense. And look at that, man. You got 3 guys right there from this conference that are on the first team. That's pretty nice, and I think that speaks volumes for the SEC.
So we look at linebacker, we look at DB, Mike, and Chad kind of hit on something there late that I think about here. I wonder how much pressure is placed on these magazines or internally that they put pressure on themselves to kind of balance this thing out. I know that the SEC somewhat dominated. If we look at total numbers with 32, as we would expect, it's the best conference. I think that's largely the consensus. The ACC and the Big Ten jump in there after that at 23 and 22 behind the SEC's 32. But if there's a thought by the group compiling these lists and putting together these All-American teams that, hey, maybe it's skewed a little bit more than that, then let's rethink this and possibly even it out. The sales distribution is going to be maybe a little bit better if we even things out. I don't know if that thought process comes into it as well.
Well, there's a lot more people that buy magazines in Columbus and Los Angeles than there are in South Carolina. So maybe they do. I think what's probably harder for them is looking at the different systems. When you look at a guy, let's say on offense, you look at a running back who's really good, but he's in a Big 12 pass first offense. He might not have the numbers that an SEC running back has, but he's still really good. How do they? I think the hard part for the staff is balancing the player's individual performance and the player's individual ability against the system that he might be in. So to me, that's really probably the hardest thing they have to do. And then when they do have an unbalanced representation, they can always go back to that. If you're in the SEC and you're a defensive lineman, like we see five of the top 8, you're going to have a lot of tackles. You're going to have a lot of tackles for losses because there's more. The balance of run versus pass is higher towards the run, so you're going to have more opportunities to have more tackles as a defensive lineman and more tackles for losses. And just like I said, the offensive line's hard to evaluate. The defensive line's easy to evaluate because you got tackles, solo tackles, assistant tackles, tackles for losses, pass breakups, and fumble recoveries. You got like 6 stats you can use. So I think that's probably the hardest. Not so much balancing out the conferences or the teams, because college football is a national brand, but balancing out the players against the systems they play in.
And that's a good point, because Calvin Ridley is not going to compile one of the 4 best wide receiver stat lines in 2016. I think we can agree upon that. There are going to be kids in the MAC, the Mountain West, and at some pass-happy schools in the Big 12 that are going to compile better stat lines. When I compile these lists for myself, whether it's a top 10 list or anything like that, or we get together and compile lists, I go with who I think are the best players, not necessarily are they going to compile the best statistics. And I'm glad to see Calvin Ridley, and of course Alabama is going to be given the nod to a certain degree. But looking at the best players, not necessarily the guys that are going to compile the best stats. If you go generic along the defensive front, though, I would say, Mike, since they're going defensive line and not separating the ends and the tackles, it's easy to go the ends route because they compile the glossier statistics with the tackles for loss and the sacks, rather than there could be some D tackles and the numbers aren't going to look crazy at the end of the year, but NFL scouts will tell you that guy's a man and he gets the job done in the middle and does the dirty work.
You're absolutely right, Mark. And the defensive tackle position is a lot like offensive line. That guy's value is blocking up the 1, the 2, the 3 holes and making sure that offensive line can't run effectively in the middle. The defensive end is responsible for the sacks and coming in and cleaning up what that defensive tackle blocks up in the middle. So the defensive tackle has the same problem as the offensive line. Very hard to evaluate. You actually have to go back and watch film, which is incredibly hard. Actually, it's not. But it's really hard to evaluate. So that's a great point. You see that defensive line is dominated by ends, outside guys, instead of the inside guys who do all the dirty work.
And I know it drives all of us crazy to different degrees in regards to maybe the legitimacy of the work done by some of these guys that compile these lists, and that's kind of what you're getting at, Mike. There have been some big faux pas in recent years from guys that are obviously given some credibility and able to vote for some of these All-American teams or get on some of these award lists, and they really don't know that much. Let me throw it out to you guys this way, and you can chime in with the guy that you think should be on here that's been omitted from the first 4 teams, Chad. Is there anybody that you think, hey, I'd like to see that guy, I think he's earned it, I think he's ready to explode, he should be on one of these teams? I know we talked Chad Kelly, but is there anybody else?
Yeah, when looking at this list, Mark, I mean, it's really kind of, like you said at the very beginning, how do you really start to break these down? I mean, how do you go about putting this list together when it's on a national scope like this? Realistically, when I'm looking at it, it's really hard for me. I mean, you've got Ingram on here, you've got O.J. Howard, you've got a lot of guys. Kendall Beckwith makes the list. I mean, this is really like a lot of the who's who of the SEC on here, and it's really kind of hard for me to look for any other name maybe that I would add on here. I mean, even Zach Cunningham's getting some love from Vanderbilt, and that's just that's saying something there. It's really taking a look at the personnel that you're seeing across the SEC. Maybe I would throw some guys in from the SEC, but you got to remember we're biased in the aspect that this is the conference that we cover, and when we're looking at it from a national perspective, we may say, this guy really isn't that good. But I have to sit back and watch more than just one game or watch more than a highlight of say, Malik McDowell. I need to see more of him to say, hey, I can without a doubt say that this guy is better than A and B. And so I think they did pretty good, guys. I mean, I'm not gonna knock it as far as, is there anybody on here that shouldn't be on here? I mean, sure, we could probably have that debate, but when we start thinking about the scope of the Power 5 teams and looking at these rosters and taking it down, I think they did a really good job.
Anything there, David, that sticks out to you that maybe from an omission standpoint?
Omission, no, but I just want to guess maybe get you guys' thought. I mean, I guess this could go into that, but is anybody surprised that it's the ACC that's in second with 23?
Well, the ACC, I don't believe, is the second best conference in college football, but does it have two teams that kind of trump the rest of the league? So out of those 22, I haven't done the count, but how many of them come from Florida State and from Clemson?
8 from Clemson and 4 from Florida State.
So 12 out of 22.
So 12 total.
12 teams are represented by 10 players.
We are biased toward the SEC, and if I wanted to throw Boom Williams in or something like that from Kentucky as an all-purpose guy, but he's probably, he's not one of the nation's best all-purpose guys, but that's just one, out of my head. He's probably one of the SEC's best, but I definitely wouldn't put him on the national list.
And you guys keep in mind, too, this list, overall selections-wise, the SEC had 32, ACC had 23, and Big Ten had 22. I think you still got a lot of respect and a lot of the tipping of the hat going towards the SEC when it's said and done.
Mark, I'll take up both of those issues real quick. As far as overlooked, I really think Dominique Sanders from Georgia should have been there at safety, and I can tell you where he can go. He can go on the fourth team in Tony Connor's spot. I like Tony Connor. I think he's a great guy. Had a great 2014 season, but he played in 5 games last year. He was injured twice, and in those 5 games, no interceptions, no sacks, and averaged about 3 tackles per game. I don't know. Again, I think he's a great guy. Had a good 2014 season, but I don't know why he is on an All-American team for 2016 after his 2015 campaign. We talked last week. Dominique Sanders had 6 interceptions, 5 tackles for loss, a sack, and was the dominant guy on the #1 pass defense in the country. I really think that merits a 4th-team All-American more than 5 games, no interceptions, no tackles, and 2 injuries. So I think he got overlooked. And then on David's point about the breakdown, here's one thing that does concern me about the SEC. Over 60% of all the SEC's All-Americans come from 3 teams on this list. The SEC has always branded itself as the best conference from top to bottom, the best conference overall, saying our number 10 team could beat your number 4 team. I think we're starting to see the conference get a little bit top-heavy. I think you're going to see Vanderbilt go back down to where it historically has. I think you're going to see Mississippi State regress. South Carolina has clearly regressed in the last couple of years. Kentucky hasn't moved forward. And now, so if you look at Alabama, LSU, and Tennessee, those 3 teams represent over 60% of the preseason All-Americans. If it looks that way at the end of the season, the composition of the SEC as the best conference from top to bottom might be in jeopardy.
The first point you made there, Mike, in regards to who were the best players in 2015 and who earned 2016 All-America status, it depends on how you're putting your team together. Are you rewarding the guys that you thought were the best in 2015, or are you making a projection that these are going to be the best players for 2016? And that's where I would defend the selection of Connor. Somebody saying Dominique Sanders, was the better player because he was on the field last year, but I'm projecting Connor to have a better year in 2016.
I'm projecting based on the player's performance from 2015. People forget Tony Connor still played in 5 games last year. And in those 5, it's not that he had less numbers because he played in fewer games. He had less numbers per game. In the 5 games he did play in, he didn't produce really anything. 3 tackles a game average, that's it.
in a sense, we can't argue any of this because none of it's played out. We're only projecting as well. So we could say Josh Dobbs. Somebody could say anybody. Give me Brandon Harris. I think Brandon Harris is going to be the best quarterback in the country this year. Well, that sounds ludicrous, but it has yet to be proven. So I could say I'm going to put him on my first team because I believe he's going to be the best quarterback in the country this year. Again, I think that's ludicrous because I think it's a combination, but it's still a projection, not just who were the best last year that didn't go to the NFL, and boom, they're on my 4 teams.
Yeah, I thought about Dominic Sanders earlier, so I definitely have to second Michael on that. It fell off my mind, but I did before we even started today. I thought about he should probably be on this list, so I'll back up Michael on that too.
You notice where Jamal Adams was a little bit lower on our top 5 lists, or at least a couple of the top 5 lists, and he made the first team. Yep. Playing up to a point that Mike made earlier in regards to, and I did, in regards to giving a nod to the better teams and the better conferences, regardless of what the stats might come out to. It's interesting to note that I believe only one group of 5 player made the traditional offense and defensive teams, but if you go to special teams, 2 positions where you can accurately equate somebody's statistics regardless of who's in front of them. How far do you punt the football regardless of where you're playing? That can be measured. Or how accurate are you kicking field goals? There we see Memphis, Colorado State, San Jose State. Those 3 schools show up just in those 2 positions.
Yeah, I'm going to give Steven a hard time here because I know he's going to watch this. So Steven Lassen, who actually wrote the article, so I'm going to give him a hard time. And nice job. He went to collegefootballstats.com and found the top guys and put them in there. That's how this one wound out in special teams here. No, I think that you're right, Mark. I mean, because it's a cumulative. It's a lot easier to, I guess, it's easier to predict and project those type of positions when you got these guys that are pretty consistent. I mean, honestly, kickers and punters, very rarely see any contact, if any, so what they're going to be able to do. They're going to give you game for game. The one that I do think is a little scary to predict on here is the kick returner and the punt returner, because some of these guys can have some bust-out years. I mean, Evan Berry, in my opinion, does deserve it. He's one of the best, and he's proven that. That kickoff return against Arkansas that they ended up losing that game in Knoxville anyways, but that was, after seeing that, I thought that game was over. So, I mean, this guy's had multiple returns. Definitely somebody I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot more of, but that one is the position that kind of is a little bit trickier for me. I think it becomes a little bit more subjective, and Antonio Callaway's in that conversation, Cam Sutton's in that conversation. These dudes could go off this year and have massive return yards and just blow it up. So I don't know. At the end of the year, I'd like to keep these and have this conversation and go back to it after the season's over, and we take a look at these actual lists and things and kind of see where guys actually landed.
Well, and we should collect this. I was just going to say we should collect this along with the AP and maybe the All-SEC teams preseason, and then see, okay, how accurate were these selections. Let me make one point, Mike, before I give it over to you, and that's going back to the offensive line. That's where it's very difficult, I think, to push somebody off the All-America list or an All-Conference list. If you've got a reputation coming into this season, let's say Cam Robinson plays, if we're talking about scouting and coaching and guys that look at the film, let's say he plays a first half of the season that's pretty average, not awful, but are people going to know that? Who's going to know that to say, you know what, Cam Robinson didn't really have that great of a season, but he came into it with a reputation as the best player, therefore he's still going to get All-America attention in the postseason. That's probably going to happen. Not to say he's not going to have a good season, but that happens more readily along the offensive line where we can't measure statistics and say that guy underachieved.
Mark, especially, that's a perfect example, especially for an offense that's going to run it 60 to 65% of the time, or if you look at Tennessee, if you have a mobile quarterback, or Ole Miss with Chad Kelly, if you have a mobile quarterback, that tackle is going to give up less sacks just simply because they either running the ball or they have a mobile quarterback. But the question I was going to ask you is, to your point about the special teams and the G5 players and the special teams, you were talking earlier about balancing out the All-American list. as far as teams and conferences. Do you think these writers and voters use the special teams All-American slots to do that balancing out? Is it easier for the special teams players?
Well, I think it is, because you touched upon it, Chad touched upon it as well. If a kicker, I can't think of his name right now, but he's kicking in the NFL. He was at Tulane a few years ago, and he was a fairly high draft choice, like first 4 or 5 rounds, and he was perfect going into his senior season. So he was first-team All-American. That's pretty easy to measure. Sure, the argument could be made, is he kicking in pressure situations at the Swamp and at venues like that with big impact games? No, he's not. He's kicking at Tulane. But the numbers say he's perfect, so he's an All-American, versus this cornerback in the Mountain West picked off 9 passes. Well, would he do that in the SEC? Or this player at Western Michigan caught 100 passes last year. Would he do that in the SEC? He may not start. He may be the 4th wide receiver on an SEC team. So I do think I can't speculate on the approach here specifically, but I would think, yes, that those opportunities are taken to get guys like that to round out the selection process.
Mark, I want to back up what you said about how preseason reputation can kind of buy into a postseason the way that too. Florida last year to me was a perfect example. Vernon Hargreaves did not have the 2015 that many projected him to have. That he had a lot better 2014. And Jalen Tabor on the other side, I feel, actually had a better season, but Hargreaves still received all the accolades of a first team. More than likely, he deserved a little bit of it, but when your stats were not as good as the year before and another guy on your team had better stats, but you still get the first team, I think a lot of that had to do with the reputation of Vernon Hargreaves more than it did his actual results.
We could really tear this apart, but we see, Daniel Carlson of Auburn showing up, and J.K. Scott as well, and we know how good those guys are, so that's well-deserved based on past performance as well. SEC Breakdown. So we got to remind everyone that we're on Twitter, throwing out a ton of good stuff each and every day throughout the off-season, and so please join us there, follow us there. Chad Neipling, David Waters, Mike Loveall. We're here every Wednesday night, release this thing on Thursday morning, and please throw out your topics. If you'd like to hear us discuss anything in particular, give us a shout on Twitter, and we will tackle anything involving SEC football. All right, until next time, we will see you for SEC Breakdown.